This is Andrew Colsky from StopMyOCD.com, and today I'm excited to have Pooria Mirzaee, who is joining us to tell us about his journey with OCD. So, Pooria, can you just introduce yourself to our audience?
Yes, for sure. First of all, I want to tell you that I'm glad to be here, and I want to say a big hi to your audience. I'm Pooria Mirzaee, and I'm a master's degree student in Italy. But for now, I'm working as a clinician in Toronto, Canada. And before that, like before everything, I was in Iran studying psychology, and all the while, uh, I was thinking that, well, I was diagnosed with OCD, and through everything, it's been with me, and I'm here to talk about my lived experiences and research and clinical experience as well.
Great, great. Well, we're really excited to have you. And one of the unique perspectives that you're going to be able to bring that we haven't had a lot of is because you've lived in different countries, it'll be really interesting as you tell us your story if there's any particular things related to the way a certain country does things differently than others so that we can learn how OCD is treated around the world. So why don't we start off with in your earliest memory, can you think of when you first noticed something that maybe might have been OCD?
Sure. Back at the time, for sure, I couldn't label it as OCD, and I didn't even had any knowledge of like a thing exists in this world that is called obsessive compulsive. But when I was like 6 or 7, even before that, I had vague memories of those periods of time that I was really sensitive on like surfaces to be flat, like the blanket or just like the tablecloth. And if it wasn't that way, I was just annoyed and had this compulsion to like make it flat. And sort of like after that, it's sort of like the symptoms were not there, or at least they were in a form that I couldn't notice them. And I had like stressful periods of time during my life, and I couldn't say that my environment was like very calming, and I could look for a treatment,
Mm-hmm.
eh, let's say, because I was born and raised in a family that also had that I was also involved with OCD, and I could see that how OCD can ruin somebody's life, and on the other hand, I was also seeing that what is the effect of some treatments, and I was creating some beliefs about this whole treatment process. Will it work? Will it really work? And apart from that, when I was a teenager, I wanted to enter the university. We had this greatly stressful exam that I was preparing for. And it was only during that time that my OCD sort of like transformed into another form. And the doubts and the intrusive thoughts sort of like kicked in a form that, hey, you might not got that sentence correctly, right?
Mm-hmm.
And just go back, like the compulsion turned into like go back and read that word again, read that sentence again. uh, what if you forget it? What if you didn't understand it fully? And it was entrance exam. So I can tell that OCD is like the biggest and smartest enemy of each of those who are living with it, because it can detect those areas that you are the most vulnerable, and it just pinpoints it, and you're like, I surrender. I know that this is where I'm vulnerable, and I will do the compulsion, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
So this was the whole dilemma that I was dealing with this whole time, and it was only like uh, about a year ago or 2 years ago that I finally found a way to let's say, manage it.
Hmm. So let me back up for a second here. So you said that your family members had OCD as well, correct?
Yeah.
And were they officially diagnosed, or you just believe they had OCD?
No, they were diagnosed.
And what country were you in at that time when you were first dealing with this? Was that back in Iran?
Yes, I was in Iran, and I was born and raised in my family, and I only left my family when I was 23, 22.
Hmm.
And speaking of the differences, can I go into that topic? The differences between the countries? Well, mostly as I try to uh differentiate, like, how OCD can manifest its symptoms in different countries, was that for me that uh I come from like uh well, in Iran, let's say certain things were very strict, like um especially in our religion, that is Islam, certain things were just prohibited. And they were there, and they were like, no, you cannot touch it, no matter what, no matter the reason.
Hmm.
So in Islam, things like alcohol, like pork, like dogs and everything is like prohibited, and you just can't touch or drink. So these were also things that I was sensitive on, and I just couldn't do it because of a religious sort of um, um, a thing that I had, like not to touch it. Because why? Because like a bigger thing imposed it,
Hmm.
and I just couldn't. I was again found myself in a helpless situation that was advised by religion. And And now, when I came to Canada and I was living in Italy, I found that the theme of OCD can also be different depending on the culture and the religion of that country, and how open-minded they are towards that symptoms. Uh, so I found that well, in Canada it is much, well, first of all, the treatments are much more accessible.
Hmm.
People talk openly about their diagnosis and about their symptoms, how they live through it. Whereas when I was in Iran, I also could um, talk about it, but I was not sure if it affects my friends or the ones that were close to me perception of me. So I had this doubt. Whereas while I was out, I did not feel anything like that.
Hmm.
So what I want to say here is that the context of where we come from hugely impacts our the way that these intrusive thoughts develop in each of us.
Yeah, I mean it's very interesting to me because I speak to people from all over the world, all different countries, and there's some countries that don't have much of an understanding of mental health, and they don't have treatment available for people. There's other countries that are very good about it. It's just very different all the way around the world. And so then one of the things that I'm trying to understand is if when you were at home and your family members had OCD that was diagnosed, officially diagnosed, what type of treatments did they go through, if any, and what did you see them deal with?
Thanks for the good question. Actually, I still see that process and sort of like the trials, let's say, of taking treatments as a failure. And and I try to see what went wrong about all this process that still my family members are dealing with it as of now. So first thing was that they were not committed to this process of taking treatment. So they tried CBT, they tried even the most severe sort of taking treatments as ECT, that is electroshocking the brain.
Hmm.
It also had side effects, but it didn't help as much as something like CBT that helped me as of now. So the biggest thing that I can really uh, put my emphasis on is that we must commit to the process of treatment, and we should stick to a plan that our therapist assigned for us, and it's just a matter of trust and being committed to that process, and just not, like, let's say, jump from one therapist to the other with this belief that no, this therapist cannot heal me, or just this person does not understand, or just because OCD can also affects the way like creates this bias against the therapist, the person that is supposed to heal us, and it's just a paradoxical sort of thing. But it is just a matter of trust and also being committed to the way.
Hmm. Okay. So then, when you yourself were officially diagnosed with OCD, which
Mhm.
country were you in?
I was in Iran.
In Iran. Okay.
Yeah.
So, um, so you get this diagnosis, and then in Iran, did you start treatment there?
No, because I found that mm, mm, well, the setting that I was in, that was the family that I was in, was not very um I just sort of like innately knew that also the people that surround you must be supportive of the way that you're in. And when I didn't see things like that, or just didn't feel like it, I also postponed it to later. And it was only after my first immigration that I started taking therapy remotely from Iran.
Hmm.
And as of now, my therapist is in Iran, and we are having sessions for like a year and a half. And all of my sessions has been remotely. So I myself, I so like tried, let's say, different therapies, even to psychoanalysis, but it's just a way to escape the main way for treating my OCD, because I knew that it's something behavioral, it's something related to like exposing myself to all of these thoughts and compulsions and just not responding to them.
Hmm.
But also it was so retrospectively, I see that it was my OCD that was like try to direct me towards other sort of like treatments, that hey, what if it's something that is more deeper, maybe it's something related to psychoanalysis that might help you.
Hmm.
And I just found that no, it is CBT, and it is like, let's say, to be more specific, acceptance and commitment therapy that can help me.
Hmm.
And it was actually. And yep,
Okay. So you're still doing therapy today over the internet.
yep.
Okay. So I know one of the questions that people have is, how do you find doing therapy over the internet versus going in person? Do you think that there's pros, cons, differences? What is your thought on that?
Well, to think simple about it, the pros of going to clinic is that, um, well, let's say about the cons of it, because I'm more towards that. I used to think that it is much better to go into the clinics, sit in person with the therapist one to one, talk about um, the sensitivities or the obsessions that you have. Whereas it was only after I started the remote therapy that I found it. It is much better to treat your OCD or just your anxiety disorder in a setting that you are used to it. In my case, that was my home, my office, and I usually had my sessions with my therapist in for example, uh in that rooms or in that places. that I knew that, yeah, most of my obsessions and compulsions happen here. So if there's one place that it must be treated and confronted, it is here. And just this remote therapy gave me this opportunity to 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 face my fears and anxiety in the same place that they were happening. And well, obviously the one of the another pros of remote therapy is that it is just very accessible. You can have sessions with anyone in the world. I even tried, like, when I was 17 or 18, talking to an international therapist that was located in India, and his approach was DBT.
Hmm.
And I remember like having this conversation with him, but it was just, as I said, like another way to, yeah, to just not follow a regular way of getting therapy. But apart from that, yeah, it was like that.
So let me just point out for our audience, you mentioned DBT. DBT stands for dialectical behavior therapy, which is a different type of therapy. And then you mentioned also previously acceptance and commitment
Yeah.
therapy, also called ACT. In the US here, acceptance commitment therapy is oftentimes used in conjunction with OCD treatment. So our primary treatment is exposure and response prevention, which is a type of CBT. And then acceptance and commitment is heavily involved in many cases, depending on your therapist. So there's a lot of acronyms and things that the audience may not know sometimes. So I try to make sure they get what we're talking about. Um, so then am I right in saying that primarily for you, the therapy that you're doing are you doing exposure therapy?
Yeah, I'm doing exposure. I'm creating this hierarchy of fears that I have, these anxieties, and when I just face and let's say just like those areas of OCD that I already had, and I talk about it with my therapist, I already know that how should I face it and how should I manage it. It's just sort of like divide it into steps
Hmm.
and just trying to face them each at a time with the least amount of anxiety that like at the step one, and here's step 10 where's like the most obsessive and most triggering thought that you have of being exposed to that certain thing. And this is the way that I only found after starting my therapy. And I don't know if our time allows me to say it, but I just want to say and pinpoint the things that helped me during this therapy and how I found my therapy that I'm taking right now effective.
Hmm.
I was thinking about it when we were having this talk with previously that w- what elements can I say to your audience that they should see in their process of taking therapy as a signifiers of being helpful, at least effective. So the first thing that I found in myself was that I had created a report with my therapist,
Hmm.
and it was only after um, I I took action after her advices, and she told me that do these things, you will be okay, no matter what amount of anxiety you might feel at the moment. And I just trusted her and did it anyways. So it is very important to do the things that your therapist say anyways, and just keep pushing forward, and just see this process as steps that you have to take. So even if you're having very bad days of getting exposed yourself to what triggers you, what's better than that? Because if you think of it as like let's say from an upper perspective, you're just constantly in avoidance of those triggers.
Hmm.
So the only way that remains is getting getting yourself exposed to that fears. So when I trusted my therapist, the process of my treatment just soured, and I felt really good about it because in those areas that my therapist diagnosed me with OCD, she advised me that I should at least take 30 to 40 sessions in some areas. And so another thing that I want to get back to it only after I start this one. Um, One of the other things that I found within myself, so it was like an external factor that I said to have
Mhm.
to basically trust your therapist in the way that they are advising you. And secondly, something that those people who have OCD should work on, basically anxiety, is building this self-confidence and um also this acceptance. So if it is just one word that I can tell about how we can confront OCD, is just acceptance. Because as long as you live, you're going to have different intrusive thoughts with different contexts. So when I was, let's say, 6 or 7, the thoughts were like, "Hey, if you don't flatten this blanket, you might not play your game." And when I got 23, it was, if you don't like wash your hands, let's say, your your application to that university in another country will be rejected. So it's like a development of intrusive thoughts as you grow,
Mhm.
right? But just found this acceptance that no matter how much how stressful and how horrible your thoughts are, just accept them and be realistic about those. So so this term of acceptance is really something that we should read about, or at least we should talk to our therapist about. And it is really important to sort of like acknowledge the consequences of the things that we do, and just be realistic about it. And so yeah, um this concept of acceptance really helped me throughout my therapy.
Mhm.
It sort of like facilitated, because I remember, now back to the topic that we were in, my therapist told me that, for example, in an area that I had that was touching, and well, one of the areas that I was sensitive on almost a year ago at this around this time, it was touching alcohol. So I could not be around alcohol, even a single drop of it. And if I were around it, I was like I would become very anxious, and I would just sort of like avoided being exposed to alcohol in the settings that I was in. So imagine that I also immigrated to a country that alcohol is widely accepted. So in Iran, you couldn't find it, so it was okay for me. And it was only after my immigration that I found that, hey, I'm much more exposed to alcohol here. So what should I do? How should I deal with it? And it was only then that I took action to see what should I do. And my therapist told me that basically for most people, this like getting to that point that alcohol no matter no more bothers you will take 15 sessions or 16 sessions, let's say. And after 6 or 7 sessions, I clearly remember my therapist telling me that you're the first one who went through it the fastest, and I got to like the last step of it, that
Mhm.
was touching it and basically having no problems with it let's say less than 6 or 7 weeks. Um, and I think that acceptance and just being um very persistent in the therapy that I was in just helped me very much. It just didn't at some point I found that uh it doesn't matter if if I'm having if I'm anxious right now, it's just a matter of going forward and just going to the next step.
Hmm.
And this mindset was the one thing that helped me hugely.
Yeah. Well, you sort of answered the question I was going to ask next, but let me ask it anyway to make sure that we get a full answer. So, in my experience, um, everyone is unique in terms of how they respond to treatment, and specifically in terms of how much time it takes from the beginning of treatment to when they start to see some changes and some success. Overall, in general, again, in my experience, OCD treatment versus some other mental health issue tends to respond, I always say, relatively quickly. That doesn't mean in one day, but it does mean less time than normally I see in other disorders. So it sounds like for you, you also had a relatively quick response. But can you tell us a little bit more about that? When you started therapy on day one, how long did it take for you in general to start feeling any kind of success? And tell us more about the timing.
Okay. So upon the first assessments that I had with my therapist, we found that I have this sort of well, my OCD is mostly involved with contamination. That is just being mm, let's say very sensitive on so it is so actually contamination is very wide. Like for some people, let's say during the COVID times, it was like viruses and biological sort of things. But for me, it was very strange. It still is. That is, um, for example, um, my contamination was and still is on things that are greasy and just oily. For example, uh, like the body oil, just the sunscreen, or from edible things like butter, like um, basically the cooking oil. They give me huge anxiety. And so this is like the biggest area of my OCD as of now. And interestingly, it wasn't like that like 2 or 3 years ago. It just sort of like developed and like crawled into this form that it is right now. But so so the biggest thing was this one, and then the next biggest thing was this sensitivity and this obsessions with alcohol. So these were the two main things. As I said, with alcohol, it's sort of like um, I started feeling like, let's say, um, relatively permanent effects. Only after the fourth week that I was like progressing from step like four, that is like just it was about Um, so if I want to elaborate more on the process of like treating that alcohol, was that first of all it was like put a bottle of wine or just something that's alcohol in front of you and just not do anything. The bottle was closed, of course, and I didn't feel anything. So the next step was just open the bottle of wine and just don't do anything for a day or just leave it there for a week. Did it, and I was not feeling anything. And so as you can imagine, there were like steps that, for example, if I'm feeling 10% of my anxiety of being directly exposed to like a like a fresh drop of wine, if it is if it triggers me at 100%, then having like an enclosed bottle of wine like close to me is 10% or 20%.
Mhm.
And so I was like I already was at step 2 that I was progressing to step 3. And when I found myself at step 8 and looked backwards and told myself, hey, you did all of this. And and I remember like a very um a moment that I felt really proud and glad about myself was the last step of confronting uh, that 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 um um the last step of treating alcohol was when I was when I it's really funny, but it was part of the process. So I remember that my therapist told me that pour a butter of wine on your hand,
Mm,
and I did it, and so all of it was through internet, and I did not feel like any, like, let's say, human connection. Like, it was all online, and it's very interesting that all of these happened through internet. Anyways, uh after that I poured the wine on my hand, I felt very, very anxious. But I just so after a minute or two, I told that, hey, it's just another step.
mhm.
And after that, when my therapist saw that I could handle it, she told me that now pour it on your shirt. So regardless of the effect that it had, I did it anyways. And it was just the ultimate step that I could take. And it was only then that I found, hey, I did it. And after that, it's still, as of now, I I can say that my sensitivity, my obsessions with alcohol are gone, and I'm really thankful about it. And uh, I think that before 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 having this talk with you, when I was in Iran, I was doing researches on OCD. Everyone were talking about it in terms of managing and handling. I do admit that we can we might be able to manage it or deal with it, but this ambition that I had was to eradicate it from our lives. How we can do it. And I just happen to I gladly happen to have these moments of seeing that an area of OCD can be gone, provided that you trust the way that you take.
Yes, yes. So, I've heard you, now talking about your therapy, and I know that, another one of the common questions that I get or comments that I get is someone who has OCD but has not begun therapy, and their concern and anxiety over the concept of exposure therapy because they know that that means they're going to have to confront their fear, and they're going to have to feel a little bit of that anxiety and even amp it up a little bit. But in the end, from when you first started therapy to now, can you give some advice to someone who's really hesitant because they're concerned about doing the exposures, but in the end it sounds like you're really glad that you did. So what do you say to that person who's concerned about doing the exposures because they don't want to address their anxiety that way?
I think, I mean, if we are realistic about it, it's just the matter of, well, the first thing that we need to know is that, well, first of all, we need to see OCD and address it as an issue. And the sooner that we confront it, the better it is for us. If we just postpone it to later and later, it also can support this, let's say, argument of not getting therapy. You just, let's just do it like a year later. Or something that I really hear a lot is that when I settle a bit more, or just when I go into like a less stressful situation, I will look for therapy. That just does not happen because our whole life is filled with stressful situation and triggers. And the more that we postpone it, the worse it is. So I think waiting for the optimal time that comes is just weighing. And I would say that there is like um well, let's not get into that topic, but basically what I want to mm, say is that it's just upon us who should take responsibility of our lives. And if you don't look for therapy yourself, basically, if you do not uh, go into yourself to see which areas you need to work on, you're not going to, nobody's going to help you. And you're the best person that can help yourself by knowing yourself better and just helping your therapist or the clinician that you go to say that, hey, I know that these are my weakness points. I tend to bias myself with this and that. Or let's say just about it's just about knowing yourself better. For example, when I went to my therapist, I told her that, like on the very first day, I told her that, look, I would love to trust you, but I'm that kind of person that might drop the therapy plan over one day. And she knew it from the very first day.
Mhm.
And we were talking constantly about what elements of our plan you don't like about. And and I really hadn't any um, during my therapy, but it's just being transparent with your therapist and see it as a sort of like a friendship relationship that you have, and be very transparent, because the person that is sitting right there have no idea about you, and just getting to know you over 45-minute sessions or 1 hour sessions. And the more you tell about yourself to them, it's just way better. And if I want to pinpoint on a deeper level, just taking responsibility and basically having a skin in the game of your life. So it's
Right.
just, do you want to help yourself or not? If the answer is not for now or whatever else, it's just then do something about it.
Mhm.
And yeah, it's just a very wide question. I'd love to talk about it more, but it's just it really depends on the person, the context they come from, the mindset that they have, even the socioeconomic status of the family that they come from.
Mhm.
And yeah,
Well, you know, you raise another important point there that I just wanted to comment on, which is, you know, it's interesting that if you hired someone to fix your car, then you would
yep,
expect them to fix your car, and you would tell them, this is what's wrong with it, this is what I see, you know, this is what's happening. If you hire someone to fix your roof, you would say, okay, this is where the leak is, and this is what I see, and this is when it started, and you would try
true,
to help them resolve it. And the other thing is that when someone goes to a therapist, though, sometimes they feel uncomfortable sharing all of the information. And I can think back to clients that I've had that, you know, we were working hard to try and address certain issues. And in two cases that I can remember, it was almost a year before that person finally says, "Oh, there's this one thing that I haven't been telling you." And then it's some major thing that explains all of the troubles we've been having, but they weren't ready to say yet. And so they were hindering their own treatment, because if I don't know it, I can't incorporate it into what we're doing. So you make a very important point there. The more you can be open and honest with your therapist, they're there to help you. And if they don't have all the information, they can't be as effective as if they did have the information.
very
So,
correct.
yeah. So thank you for raising that. So, So one other question for you. So you grow up, or you're born in Iran. Your family is there. They have OCD. You get diagnosed in Iran. You work with a therapist over the internet from Iran. Have you had any experience, personal experience, with either Italy or Canada in terms of the way they treat OCD?
Unfortunately not, but I would love to. Well, what the biggest reason that I came to Canada was to uh take part in an OCD lab that was focused on treating OCD and doing research on OCD, but it just didn't go the way that I wanted. But unfortunately, I don't have any experiences in that areas.
Mhm. Okay. All right. No, I was just curious. So, one other thing that I wanted to circle back on was when you were describing your experience with doing therapy over the internet, you raised a lot of important points, but one of them that really stands out to me is, you know, I'm here in the US and I have been doing therapy for OCD, and I had an office where people would come into my office. This is before the pandemic. And then the pandemic hits and we all close our offices down and everything goes online. And what I learned from that was that just what you said, the many patients have issues that are related to where they are at home, for example. And so to try and recreate that in an office is really hard. Whereas if I'm online and the patient is there in the setting where the triggers are, it was so much easier to do therapy. So I actually shut down my office and I do everything online now because I find um, the success rate to be much better because we're actually able to go where the patient needs to be. And and so when I talk to potential new patients, they're kind of skeptical. It's like, well, you mean I can't come into the office? I'm like, what am I going to do in the office? I can't do if you have concerns about something in your kitchen. How am I going to recreate that in my office? Let's go to your kitchen and do it. So I'm a huge fan of online therapy for that reason and many others. And I really have not seen any downside with with one exception I'll give, which is there have been rare cases where I have met with patients out in the community. Like, for example, I had a patient that had concerns related to being in a busy coffee shop. So we went to a busy coffee shop and we did some work there. So there's some cases where you'll do something like that, but in general, I found the online experience to be really, really helpful.
True.
So, so I appreciate you mentioning that about how it's worked for you, and you're talking about across countries, and it still is working for you.
Yeah.
Um, so let's ask this then. Um, on sort of a final note, if you were wrapping up and you were talking to a group of people who are newly diagnosed or maybe not even diagnosed yet, and they suspect they might have OCD, what are your best what's your best advice for them? What should they do? They think they might have OCD, or they just got diagnosed with OCD and they're really concerned about what comes next for them. What would you say to them?
Uh, I would, so I, as one, speak for myself and my lived experience. And as you can, and as I told about myself, I I did two immigrations, one from Iran to Europe and from Europe to North America. And I did all of that after like immense amount of studies and being accepted to this university, going through a lot of processes. And I exposed myself to a lots of, let's say, life and death sort of situation to from an OCD perspective, right? Because when OCD comes, it just gives you this immense amount of fear and anxiety that if this step goes wrong, then your whole life, your whole career is going to be ruined. And in the face of all of that, I'm here and I'm talking with you about my fears and anxiety. Even talking about them used to give me fear and also anxiety. But now I'm openly talking about it. If I want to just give one advice, is that I myself am an example of a person who lived through a lots of triggers from a wide range of things. And if one of those fears that each of you are going to come true, they would have came. And actually they came. For example, I clearly remember that I was planning for certain things and my OCD was telling me that this can go wrong at the end. And even if that things went wrong at the end, I did not attribute it to this obsession that my OCD was dictating to me, that it was because that OCD told you that it can go wrong. It clearly at the end is very clear that realistically speaking, um, for example, when when you're applying for a visa to a certain country, your OCD comes in play in the format of saying you're going to get rejected for this and this. And when I was rejected the first time, I do not remember that I could say that, hey, maybe I was rejected because my OCD told me. Isn't that funny? It's just the most um it just the thoughts that are related to OCD are just the fastest. And you just tend to, and a person with with OCD traits gets to detect them and see them and hear these voices faster. And at the very end, if you see things clearly, you can attribute it to factors that were around you and you just didn't notice them. You didn't take action for them.
Hmm.
It's not that your OCD told you something and it happened. And it's just if we try to diffuse this thoughts and action sort of link that is among those who have OCD, I think it speaks volumes and it creates a lot of help. Because I as one can remember those moments that I had that if I'm having this thought, then it definitely means it's going to happen. And I cannot remember like maybe I can remember like maybe one or two cases that I had like an intrusive thought and that actually happened, but at the end it wasn't related to like this OCD thought. So I think that this detaching the thought from the reality can helps us a lot.
Hmm.
And I just if I want to be very precise and concise about what can help them, is just keep pushing forward. Just trust yourself and the person you're trusting, and just go forward. No matter how hard the way it is, just go forward. There's no way to. There is no benefit in going back and staying um, and remaining still about this issue you have. One other thing that I really want to say is that it's about taking medication. So
Hmm.
I did a lot of research about combining what is the effect of taking medication and combine it with taking let's say classical neoclassical approaches of taking therapy, such as CBT or ACT. It just the combination of both of them is much better than taking each one of them apart. So if you take medication and just do nothing about it, it means oh it is it weighs the same as taking therapy without taking medication. So of course for people with different levels of symptoms and different manifestations of OCD. It is different. Some people can benefit solely from taking CBT, the therapy the talking approach, while some people with, let's say, mildly levels of OCD might just take benefit from taking medications. But I, I also, along with the research that I did in OCD, I see it in such a way that medication just creates that platform of responding to a stressful and triggering to triggers of your OCD in a in a way that you can manage it, because you happen to have lower levels of basically of arousal, say.
Mhm.
So medication only creates this platform that you should build on. So this process of building on a calmer platform that taking medication has created, is that taking therapy, is that taking CBT or ACT sessions with your therapist. So combination of both of them is really what I would suggest. If of course it is advised by a psychiatrist along with a psychologist. But what I mainly want to say is that uh, there is no stigma or just one negative thing that is attached to taking medications. See it is in that way that many people who have physical disabilities take medications, and in this era of time that we live, along with myriad of anxiety triggering situations, taking medication for dealing with your anxiety is nothing.
Mhm. Yeah. No, I appreciate you saying that, because ultimately, what is the goal? The goal is to get past the OCD, to feel better, to not
True,
be impacted by the thoughts. And
true.
you're right, medication can be really helpful in certain cases. Therapy is really helpful in certain cases. The combination of the two is very strong. The one thing that I always tell people when they're asking those types of questions is, when you're seeking out a therapist, make sure you ask the questions. What training do they have in OCD? How much work have they done with OCD? Because unfortunately, at least here in the US, our schools, they don't teach OCD. So you come out with a license to practice therapy and you've never learned anything about OCD. So it's important to find out, what specific training do they have and what knowledge do they have. And the same thing goes for the medications. For I always tell people, see a psychiatrist, because a psychiatrist is specifically trained in medications related to, our thoughts and things. And again, it's important to ask the psychiatrist, what knowledge do you have about OCD? What training have you had? Because again, they don't learn about it in school really. And I've had conversations with a decent enough number of psychiatrists who really don't know much about OCD, and OCD requires totally different doses of medications than other things. So if the prescriber is not trained in OCD, they're not going to know what dose they're supposed to be giving you. So as long as you check out and make sure that the people that you're relying upon to provide treatment are trained properly to treat OCD, then that's the main importance.
Absolutely right. So I think it is one other difference that is related to like countries, and I just happen to know it right now.
Yeah, yeah. So this has been really, really interesting, and I'm so glad that you had the time to join us and to share your experiences. Again, I'm sure that people watching this video get a certain degree of comfort to hear that here's someone else that has gone through the same stuff that I'm feeling, and he's made it out to the other side, and he's gotten good progress, and he's able to talk about it openly, because there's this fear of stigma about OCD, and that's why we're doing all these podcasts and videos in the first place, is to just bring it out there, let people see, hey, look, it's real people with real issues, and they're fine. So that's a good thing. So I want to, again, thank you for taking your time to join us and to share your story. And I'm sure it's going to be really helpful for many people.
Thank you so much for creating this podcast and this YouTube channel to demystify this whole myth of OCD and just trying to contribute to this whole process. Thank you so much.
Thank you.